Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. Today, we're addressing something that just won't go away, why I don't hit the drums in these demos as hard as I can, and why you should consider not hitting your drums as hard as you can too. Here at Sounds Like a Drum, we make a lot of different kinds of videos, and today is going to be one of those chemistry set days where we're going to talk a little less and we're going to play a little more because there's actually some science behind why we are taking a stand about this. Today, hitting things as hard as we can, hitting them kind of hard, and understanding the sonic results of the way that we attack the drum set is what we are addressing. And this has been something that's been in the comments constantly for a really long time. We've touched on it. We decided to just kind of like put a fork in this today. So here we go. Here at the show, we got into this in the first place because we care a lot about sound, specifically about getting the sound out of the drums that we want and getting rid of the parts of the sound that we don't want, figuring out how to get the best possible result. What this means is that in addition to tuning and head choice and muffling and all of that, we have to consider how we're hitting the drums and especially how hard we're hitting them. The way that ears react, microphones react, anything that's listening to the drums, this is going to affect it dramatically no matter what kind of music you play. It's easy to think in a very simplistic way that the harder we hit a drum, the bigger a sound and louder we're going to make. The fact of the matter is, the physics do not bear this out. The harder we hit, or the softer we hit, the whole tone and sound of the drum changes. It's not just a volume fader going up as we swing harder and harder and harder. What we're going to do is hit each drum 3 times at distinctly different volume levels. And we're going to normalize those, which is to say then turn them all up so that they live at the same volume so that we can hear how the tone changes across this spectrum of dynamics. What you're hearing here is a loss of tone as the attack becomes louder because we can only turn things up so much, and if the attack of the drum is this much louder than the rest of the decay, as in the hardest hitting, it means that we are effectively hearing a loss of the rest of the sound of the drum. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if we hit the drum more gently and have room to turn up the microphones that are hearing that drum, we can get all of that decay because we don't have that giant spike at the beginning that effectively represents how loud we can turn it up. Let's hear this phenomena in the context of grooves now. Now, before you get angry and think that we here think that there's something wrong with hitting drums very hard, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're talking about is the possibility that at certain intensity levels, we are losing something in the sound that we may not even realize we're losing. And moving away from the idea that power is power, and that's going to get us the biggest sound we want, and coming toward the idea that we might want to back off a little bit in some circumstances. If you are a super hard hitter, it can get you more of the tone of the drum and get you away from the idea that you're going to have to do really dramatic stuff to the recording or to the sound in the room after the fact. On the other hand, if you're a drummer who lives primarily in the low volume world, it's worth working on playing a little bit harder, because there are a lot of situations where you need to actually project power from the kit in order to drive the band and in order to sit in the mix correctly. The fundamental point here is that every dynamic level has an appropriate context, even the most extreme ones, and there are gains and losses in every direction. So at the end of the day, no matter where you spend most of your time, make sure that you spend a little bit of practicing expanding that range so that at the very least, you're comfortable in some of the zones that aren't your normal space. For the demonstration today, we went with single ply heads, which is generally what we use for demonstrations here. Not necessarily the heads that a heavy hitter might choose, but also for us, they are giving the most in terms of demonstrating the differences in sound across these dynamic ranges. It's also worth noting that if you move to thicker heads, whether for durability or for perceived projection or any other reason, it's going to mean that you need to hit them a little bit harder, or maybe a lot harder depending on the heads, because there's more mass there and we need more energy to get that mass moving. This can manifest also in moving up in a stick size. For instance, today I'm playing Hickory 5Bs rather than my normal Carter McLean sticks. A lot more weight, especially in the front, really effective for this kind of thing. And I practice sometimes with heavier sticks in case I find myself in a situation like this. It's also worth noting that we're probably going to have to change some of these heads after today, because playing thin single ply heads with this amount of aggression, they're not going to last that long. So if you do spend most of your time playing in this range, or you're thinking about experimenting with it, consider going to a slightly thicker batter head just for the sake of this kind of playing. We want to talk for a moment about musical opportunities where it does make sense to hit as hard as you can, and particularly some of your and definitely my favorite players who are hard hitters. An awful lot of the time we are hearing guys playing very aggressively in large venues, outdoor arenas, festivals, things like that, where the immediate experience of hitting the drums as hard as you can is actually really comfortable, and it's able to go out into the air. It's not devastating a small room the way it would if it was maybe a 100 or 200 person club, something like that. There are appropriate times to swing for the fences. It can also be in the studio, but these things are still going to manifest there, these issues with the tone. And our favorite players, especially the guys that are playing gigantic tours, making very expensive records, they have a lot of attention to detail in both the drums themselves and any production and post-production that goes into making their drum sound. I can tell you from experience that the sound of the quintessential metal drumming in the room with the drums is very different than it sounds after it's done on a recording, because in order to utilize that sound through microphones, there are things that have to happen for it to sit in a mix. It's not as simple as hitting as hard as you can and dropping the sticks and walking away. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to tech Gojira's most recent record, and they are amazing players. They are amazing writers, and Mario is singularly the most aggressive drummer that I have ever seen play in person in front of me. And I'm talking about from 3 feet away, because in that case, they were trying to create real drum sounds, which they did. We're not talking about samples or any of that stuff. We had drums and microphones. And That dude hits so hard with sticks that are so big I could barely manipulate them. And that changed my perception of what it even meant to play this way, because that's a guy who's trying to capture a performance. It's not about play really hard live and then we're going to go for this other studio thing. He did exactly the same thing in the studio as he does on stage in front of 100,000 people. And that's part of capturing a performance. So that meant that me and the engineer and everybody else had to do our job and make sure that what he was doing in that room was captured in the way that he wanted on the other end. I definitely didn't say, hey Mario, why don't you play 60% as hard as you are because it's going to sound better? Absolutely not. This is the other side of that, is he's making the performance. How do we capture what he's doing? How do we get the most power out of that? How do we translate that into something that's then going to have guitar and bass and strings and whatever else on top of it that could cover up some of that? Now for a very important addendum to this kind of playing. We have to be careful if we're going to dive into this, or even if we've been doing it for a bit, about the possibility of, in addition to damaging our gear, breaking heads, breaking sticks, the possibility of the physicality of playing this way starting to do things to our bodies that are not so great. If you want to dive into this sort of thing, first of all, make sure that you're playing sticks that are appropriate for it. You're going to need some weight so that you're not using your body to make all of the force to get that sound. Secondarily, and this is every heavy drummer I've ever met went with this, you got to stretch, you got to warm up at least a little bit and make sure that your body is ready to receive the pummeling that it's going to get from you doing this to the drum set. And lastly, watch guys that have been doing this for a long time, maybe take a lesson, consider grip, consider posture, consider all of the ways that the body has to move to do this kind of playing. Because if you just decide to hit as hard as you can one day out of the blue with 7 A's, you're going to hurt yourself. And it's also not going to sound great. Even if you magically don't, it's going to sound thin. It's not going to get what you want. I hope at the end of all this it's clear that we don't have any ill will toward the idea of playing super aggressively in whatever manner you want to. This is not about that. This is about addressing the idea that there's a right time for everything, and at the extreme ends, you might have to fold in some other technology or things like that to get you to the sound that you're going after. What we do here with relatively low ceilings and going after sound and tone and demonstrating that stuff is not facilitated necessarily by hitting as hard as I possibly can in this room. It doesn't translate. So for you, the viewer, we're choosing the way that we do this to give you the best possible sound so that you can work with your own drums. And if you tune them up and they sound great and then you want to hit them as hard as you can, be my guest. I mean, that nothing would make me happier. Thanks so much for coming along on this. Please check out the Patreon. The link is below. There will be more from pretty much all of our videos over there in addition to exclusive content. Lots of levels to choose from over there. Please check it out. It's the best way to help us continue to get to do this. And we would love if you like, comment, and subscribe and tell us about hitting as hard as you can. The perils, the pitfalls, the possibilities, and what works for you.